On a rainy Thursday evening in Seoul, Seo-yeon stood outside the quiet funeral hall, clutching a black umbrella she didn't remember opening. The soft rain blurred the city lights into streaks of gold and white, making everything feel unreal. Only 3 days earlier, her husband, Kang Min-jun, had kissed her forehead before leaving for what he called another late meeting. He smiled the same way he always did, warm, reassuring, almost apologetic. Then he never came home. The police found what they believed was his car crushed beneath a collapsed mountain road. No body, only his wallet, wedding ring, and burned identification. Everyone accepted he was gone. Everyone except Seo-yeon. As mourners whispered condolences behind her, one strange feeling refused to leave her heart. She wasn't waiting to say goodbye. She was waiting for something impossible to happen. Seo-yeon hesitated before stepping inside. The warmth of the funeral hall wrapped around her, carrying the scent of white chrysanthemums and burning incense. Rows of mourners dressed in black bowed respectfully toward Min-jun's memorial portrait, where his familiar smile seemed frozen in a happier time. She couldn't bring herself to look for long. Instead, her eyes wandered across unfamiliar faces, former colleagues, distant relatives, business associates she had never met. Then something made her stop. At the very back of the hall, a tall man wearing a black cap and a disposable face mask stood motionless, watching not the portrait, but her. His gaze never shifted. The moment their eyes met, he lowered his head and quietly turned away. Before Seo-yeon could react, he disappeared through a side exit. Her heartbeat quickened. Everyone else seemed too consumed by grief to notice. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. That man hadn't come to mourn. He had come to make sure she was there. Seo-yeon stopped mid-step. The voice behind her was calm, familiar, and carried the weight of someone who had rehearsed this moment for days. Slowly, she turned around. Standing beside Min-jun's memorial table was a woman she had never seen before. She looked to be in her early 30s, dressed in a simple black dress beneath a long wool coat. Her face was pale from exhaustion, yet her eyes held something even heavier than grief, guilt. She clutched a worn envelope so tightly that its edges had begun to crease. Instead of offering condolences, the woman simply stared at Seo-yeon as if searching for permission to speak. Around them, mourners continued their quiet conversations, unaware that something far more important was unfolding only a few feet away. The woman finally took a cautious step forward and extended the envelope with trembling hands. "He told me to give this to you, but only if he never came back." Seo-yeon's breath caught in her throat. Min-jun had prepared for this. But why? Seo-yeon's fingers trembled as they brushed against the envelope. It felt old, not days old, but years. The paper had softened with age, and the corners were worn as though it had been hidden, carried, and protected for a very long time. She turned it over, expecting to find Min-jun's careful handwriting. Instead, her heart nearly stopped. Written across the back in faded blue ink were 5 words she recognized instantly. "If you're reading this, run." It was her handwriting. Not similar. Not close. It was unmistakably hers, the same looping letters she used in birthday cards, grocery lists, and little notes she left on the refrigerator. But she had never written those words. She would have remembered. Around her, the funeral hall suddenly felt too quiet. The conversations faded into distant echoes as her pulse thundered in her ears. The mysterious woman watched without speaking, as if she had expected this exact reaction. Seo-yeon's memories began searching desperately for an explanation, but they found only empty spaces where certainty should have been. Someone had hidden part of her own life from her. The vibration was so sudden that the envelope nearly slipped from Seo-yeon's hands. Every instinct told her it was impossible. With shaky fingers, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up, reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. Sender, Min-jun Red Heart. Her breath caught. The funeral hall seemed to freeze around her. The soft chants, whispered condolences, and rustling footsteps dissolved into silence as she stared at the notification. Her husband had been declared dead 3 days ago. His phone had supposedly been recovered from the wreckage, burned beyond repair. The police had shown it to her themselves. Yet a new message waited. She hesitated, her thumb hovering above the screen as dread battled hope. What if it was a cruel prank? What if opening it meant accepting something even worse than his death? She finally tapped the notification. The message contained only one sentence. Don't let anyone see the letter. A cold chill traveled down her spine. Whoever had sent it knew exactly what she was holding. Seo-yeon spun around, scanning every corner of the funeral hall. The woman who had handed her the envelope was gone. There was no goodbye. No hurried footsteps. No movement through the crowded entrance. It was as if she had dissolved into the sea of black coats and sorrow. Seo-yeon pushed past a group of mourners, whispering quick apologies, searching every hallway and side room. Nothing. Then her eyes fell to the polished wooden floor. A single silver key lay where the woman had been standing. It wasn't an ordinary house key. It was attached to a faded navy keychain embroidered with tiny white daisies, flowers Min-jun had once laughed at, calling them the happiest flowers in the world. Seo-yeon knelt slowly, her fingers hovering over it before picking it up. On the back of the keychain, barely visible beneath years of scratches, were 3 engraved characters. Locker 217. Before she could make sense of it, she felt the unmistakable sensation of someone standing directly behind her. A shadow stretched across the floor, stopping just beside her hand. She hadn't been the only one looking for the key. Seo-yeon rose slowly, the small silver key clenched tightly in her palm. Her pulse pounded so loudly she could barely hear the murmured prayers echoing through the funeral hall. She turned. Standing less than 2 meters away was Detective Park Do-hyun, the lead investigator who had personally informed her that Min-jun was dead. His charcoal overcoat was still damp from the rain, and his usually composed expression had been replaced by something she had never seen before. Fear. Not sympathy. Not concern. Fear. His eyes weren't looking at her face. They were fixed on the key in her trembling hand. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Seo-yeon noticed something impossible. When Detective Park shifted his stance, the sleeve of his coat slid back just enough to reveal an expensive wristwatch. The exact same watch she had given Min-jun on their first wedding anniversary. There was no doubt. Even the tiny scratch near the clasp was still there. The detective quickly covered his wrist, but he was already too late. Seo-yeon felt the ground disappear beneath her. If Min-jun's watch was on the detective's wrist, then whose funeral had she come to? Detective Park didn't deny it. Instead, he slowly lowered his hand, as though hiding the watch no longer mattered. The confidence Seo-yeon had seen during the investigation was gone. In its place was the exhausted face of a man who had carried the same burden for far too long. He leaned closer, careful not to attract the attention of the mourners. "There isn't enough time," he whispered. Seo-yeon searched his face for anger, deception, anything that would make sense of the nightmare unfolding around her. She found only regret. The detective glanced toward Min-jun's memorial portrait, then toward the funeral hall entrance, where 2 unfamiliar men in black suits had just stepped inside. They weren't grieving. They scanned the room with disciplined precision, as if searching for someone. For her. Park's jaw tightened. "They're earlier than I expected." Seo-yeon instinctively tightened her grip on the envelope and the key. Every answer she wanted suddenly seemed less important than one terrifying realization. Someone else wanted them first. Time seemed to fracture into slow, unbearable seconds. The taller of the 2 men fixed his gaze on Seo-yeon, his expression unnervingly calm. Without breaking eye contact, he slipped his hand inside his tailored black jacket. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Detective Park reacted first. He stepped in front of Seo-yeon just enough to shield her without drawing attention. To everyone else in the funeral hall, it looked like a quiet conversation between 2 acquaintances. But beneath his coat sleeve, his hand had already found the grip of his service weapon. The man withdrew his hand. Not a gun. A small black envelope. He held it up where only Seo-yeon could see, then slowly turned it around. Written across the front in silver ink were 4 chilling words. For Han Seo-yeon only. The stranger gave a faint, almost sympathetic smile before placing the envelope on an empty condolence table. Then he walked away. No threats. No explanation. Only one whispered sentence lingered in Seo-yeon's mind. Sometimes the most dangerous warning isn't the one someone says. It's the one they leave behind. Darkness swallowed the funeral hall. A collective gasp echoed through the room as the lights cut out without warning. The only illumination came from the rain-soaked windows and the faint glow of emergency exit signs. Somewhere in the crowd, a child began to cry. Someone shouted for the staff. Seo-yeon instinctively reached for the black envelope on the condolence table. It was gone. Her heart lurched. She turned toward Detective Park. Gone. The silver locker key was still clutched tightly in her left hand, but the aged envelope from the mysterious woman had also disappeared. Panic rose in her chest. Then, through the darkness, a single phone screen lit up across the hall. A man stood beneath Min-jun's memorial portrait, his face hidden by the glow. He slowly raised the phone toward Seo-yeon. On the screen was a live video. Not of the funeral. Of Kang Min-jun. He was alive. Dressed in the same charcoal suit he had supposedly died in. He looked directly into the camera, his face bruised and exhausted. Then, as if he could somehow see Seo-yeon watching, he spoke 6 words that shattered the last piece of her reality. If you love me. He paused, eyes filling with fear. Don't look for me. The screen went black. When the lights came back on 2 seconds later, the man holding the phone had vanished. Only one question remained. If Min-jun was alive. Whose funeral had everyone just attended? The funeral hall emptied in uneasy silence, but Seo-yeon couldn't move. Every conversation around her sounded distant, muffled beneath the pounding of her heartbeat. Detective Park was nowhere to be found. The mysterious woman had disappeared. The black envelope had vanished. Only one thing remained in her possession, the silver key engraved with locker 217. She slipped it into her coat pocket as if protecting the last piece of Min-jun still left in the world. The police insisted the power outage had been a technical fault, but Seo-yeon no longer believed in coincidences. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving Seoul's streets glistening beneath the city lights. As she walked toward her car, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Its headlights remained off, but she could feel someone watching her. The engine started the moment she reached her door. She wasn't driving home. She was going to find locker 217. Locker 217 was inside Seoul Central Station, hidden among hundreds of identical metal lockers lining a quiet underground corridor. The late-night commuters hurried past without noticing the woman whose hands shook as she searched for the engraved number. There it was. 217. The silver key slid into the lock effortlessly. For one terrifying second, she couldn't bring herself to turn it. What if it was empty? What if it confirmed Min-jun had lied to her from the beginning? She closed her eyes and twisted the key. The locker door clicked open. Inside rested a neatly folded gray hoodie, a small USB drive taped beneath the shelf, and a sealed photograph wrapped in clear plastic. On top lay a yellow sticky note written in Min-jun's unmistakable handwriting. Only 4 words. Trust no one. Especially. The rest had been torn away. The footsteps were slow. Measured. Not the hurried pace of commuters catching the last train. Someone knew exactly where they were going. Seo-yeon quickly slipped the USB drive into her pocket and grabbed the sealed photograph. She gently closed the locker without making a sound, pressing herself against the cold concrete wall beside it. The footsteps grew louder. Closer. Then they stopped. A shadow stretched across the floor. The unknown visitor stood directly in front of locker 217. Without hesitation, the stranger tried the handle. Locked. A quiet sigh escaped from behind the hood. So, she got here first. Seo-yeon's pulse raced. That voice. She had heard it before. Not today. Years ago, it was Lee Hae-jin, Min-jun's younger brother. The same man who had hugged her at the funeral only hours earlier, promising they would get through the tragedy together. Now his face was stripped of grief. He looked focused. Desperate. Almost relieved. Hae-jin looked around to make sure the corridor was empty before speaking softly into an earpiece hidden beneath his collar. Locker's been emptied. A pause. No, she has it. Seo-yeon's knees nearly gave way. He wasn't searching for memories. He was reporting to someone. For the first time since Min-jun disappeared, she questioned whether anyone in the family had ever been telling her the truth. Safe inside her locked car, Seo-yeon finally peeled away the plastic protecting the photograph. It wasn't a picture of Min-jun. It was their wedding day. She smiled brightly in her ivory dress while Min-jun looked at her with unmistakable love. But that wasn't what made her hands tremble. Standing behind the newlyweds was Detective Park. Next to him stood the mysterious woman from the funeral. And beside them, a little girl, no older than 6, holding Min-jun's hand. On the back of the photograph, written in Min-jun's handwriting, was one heartbreaking sentence. You were never supposed to remember her. Seo-yeon stared at the child. She had no memory of ever meeting her. Yet the little girl was looking straight into the camera. As if she had been waiting all these years for Seo-yeon to remember. Seo-yeon couldn't stop staring at the little girl's face. There was something hauntingly familiar about her smile. Then, without warning, a forgotten memory surfaced. 5 years earlier, after a devastating car accident, Seo-yeon had awakened in a hospital with only minor injuries, or so everyone had told her. They said the concussion had caused a few gaps in her memory, nothing serious. She believed them. She trusted Min-jun. Now she wondered what else had disappeared. Her phone suddenly rang. The caller ID showed unknown. She answered. A little girl's trembling voice whispered, "Auntie. Daddy said you'd find me someday." The line went silent. Seo-yeon's tears fell freely. Daddy. The little girl had just called Min-jun Daddy. The address led to a quiet children's care home on the outskirts of Seoul. It was nearly midnight when Seo-yeon arrived. The building was modest, surrounded by flowering trees that swayed gently in the night breeze. Inside, a caregiver silently led her to a small playroom. A little girl sat alone, drawing with colored pencils. She looked up. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the little girl smiled through tear-filled eyes and walked toward Seo-yeon. Instead of introducing herself, she held out a faded family photograph. "We used to come here together," she whispered. Seo-yeon looked down. She was in the picture. Smiling beside Min-jun. Holding the little girl's hand, the caregiver quietly explained everything. Years ago, Min-jun's younger sister had died unexpectedly, leaving behind her only daughter, Ha-eun. Rather than sending the child into foster care, Seo-yeon and Min-jun had secretly raised her while completing the legal adoption process. Then came the accident. Seo-yeon's head injury erased months of memories surrounding Ha-eun. Doctors advised against forcing those memories back too quickly, fearing further psychological trauma. Min-jun made an impossible choice. He decided to wait. Days became months. Months became years. Each year, telling the truth became harder. His silence wasn't born from betrayal. It was born from fear of losing Seo-yeon all over again. As dawn broke over Seoul, Detective Park finally found Seo-yeon. This time, he told her everything. Min-jun had uncovered a massive financial fraud involving powerful executives who were laundering money through his company. The moment he gathered enough evidence to expose them, his life, and everyone he loved, was placed in danger. The funeral. The disappearance. The secret locker. It had all been part of a desperate plan to keep Seo-yeon and Ha-eun alive until the authorities could dismantle the organization. Detective Park handed Seo-yeon a sealed government file. "They've all been arrested." Then he smiled for the first time. "Your husband is finally coming home." 3 months later. Spring arrived in Seoul, painting the parks with soft pink cherry blossoms. Seo-yeon stood beneath the blooming trees with Ha-eun by her side. Across the bridge, a familiar figure slowly approached. Min-jun. Older. Scarred. Alive. Neither of them ran. The years between them were too heavy for that. When they finally stood face to face, words failed them. Instead, Seo-yeon reached out and held his hand, the same hand she had believed she'd lost forever. Ha-eun slipped her small hand between theirs. For the first time in years, they stood together as the family they had always been. Some scars never disappear. But love, when it survives the truth, becomes stronger than the lies that tried to destroy it.